We've all thought about aging, from superficial reasons to the age-old question, what happens when we die? But what if aging could be slowed or even halted? Is this possible? We're going to explore a potential answer to this. Aging has been defined as a persistent decline in the age-specific fitness components of an organism due to internal physiological deterioration by Michael Rose in his book, Evolutionary Biology of Aging. The physiological deterioration described here can be several molecular and cellular issues, but most of these include DNA in some way. DNA is found inside cells and is very, very small. In fact, the scale we will have to discuss is called the nanoscale. What you see me coding is a basic program that will hopefully help you understand the size of things we're talking about. The study of processes on this scale is called nanoscience, and the technologies used are called nanotechnology. The origins of the field of nanotechnology can be traced back to 1959, when Richard Feynman presented his paper, There's Plenty of Room at the Bottom. In the paper, he asked the question, why cannot we write the entire 24 volumes of the Encyclopedia Britannica on the head of a pin? He then dives into the mathematical analysis of such an undertaking by comparing the size of the pinhead in atoms and how big each letter would be. And it becomes evident that yes, that would be possible. Although I'm no Richard Feynman, I will attempt to do something similar here today. After painting this picture, Feynman then launches into the how it could be done and the need for various sophisticated technologies. Feynman was ahead of his time, and the scanning tunneling microscope that would allow scientists to see and manipulate individual atoms would be invented 22 years later. Today, many more of these sophisticated technologies exist. Of these technologies, I am most interested in artificial intelligence, wireless communication, computer chips, nanotubes, CRISPR, and optics. This is my argument. Using these technologies, I think we can create a device that can navigate the human body via the bloodstream to repair or manipulate DNA where needed, in order to slow or even halt aging. I want you to imagine for a second an unmanned submarine created to explore the deepest parts of the ocean. What would it need? Well, it would need a hull to withstand the environment, a way to communicate with a computer or people at the surface, a camera to detect what's in front of it or around it, and a light source so the camera doesn't just detect darkness. And maybe some tools and supplies to interact with the environment, like grabbing stuff from the bottom of the ocean, collecting samples, things of that nature. It would also need a propulsion system and an energy source. But for what we're talking about today, we're going to ignore those parameters for the time being. However, future research should most definitely explore these vital components. The object would have to move, right? Let's continue our analogy with our nanorobot and the submarine. Our hull and components will be made of various carbon nanotube structures. The thickness of these nanotubes can range from a fraction of a nanometer to 100 nanometers. It depends on the structure that you have. If you want multi-layered or single layers, it comes in all different shapes and sizes, and you can kind of manipulate them any way that you want. As stated in an article entitled Nanobioelectronics, CNTs, or carbon nanotubes, have large aspect ratios, high mechanical strength, excellent chemical and thermal stability, and rich electronic and optical properties. This makes them the ideal candidate for our nanobot. Next, we need a way for the nanobot to see, the world around it. This poses the biggest problem because cameras and lights are not quite small enough currently for what we need. So it would take further research into these fields to make it possible. I mean, they're very small. They get down to like the width of a human hair. but that's not small enough to fit the smallest parts of our bloodstream, which are actually capillaries. And they wouldn't fit into those components. So the goal is to not get this nanobot clogged anywhere in our body, right? It needs to be able to navigate even through the smallest parts to not get stuck. So as it stands right now, there are no cameras that can handle this task. But another possibility could be that we use something like the technology found in electron microscopes, where we create an image without the use of lenses or light. Microscopes are pretty big. I think the smallest one fits into, a case that can fit in like an overhead bin on an airplane, right? So they're small, they're portable, you can carry them around, but nothing that it would take to shrink down to the nanoscale. Nothing exists there either. So there's a lot of research being done on this to try to get optics much smaller. So all in all, so this is kind of like a roadblock in this bot that we're trying to build. It's a hurdle that's in our way. So this is the biggest one actually. But let's so further research needs to be done here. Let's get past this point, right? Let's theoretically get past this point and say, all right, we've devised a camera small enough to fit onto this nanobot. From there, what would we have to do? So assuming we can gather data from the surroundings, the technology currently does exist to be able to transmit that data from inside the human body, so from our bot on this nanoscale, to a larger computer outside of it. On a larger computer, we can do much more intensive calculations and figure things out. We can run stuff through databases and train neural networks and algorithms to decide different things, right? And like use geospatial reasoning and to navigate through the body, and we can do all kinds of stuff once we get this data outside, and then we can take that data, we can take our calculations and send it back. So anyway, this technology does exist to transmit this, and this technology is described in detail in an article entitled "Wireless Communication System via Nanoscale Plasmonic Antennas." I'm not going to go into the details of it. It's really complicated stuff, but all in all, the structure requires around 600 nanometers for implementation. So it's not just a couple of nanometers wide. It's pretty big. It's big on the nanoscale. But as we'll see later, after we're done coding this thing, how much room we actually have to play with, right? So let's just keep that in mind. So just a couple numbers we've gone over so far, right? Like we can get nanotubes as small as almost pretty much half of nanometer, right? So on average, we'll say about 2, maybe 1 or 2. And then we've got this 600 nanometer structure that we need to be able to communicate with. So this is what we would use to send our hypothetical image data to the powerful computer on the outside. From there, this is where the AI comes in, and computer vision is a field within the umbrella of artificial intelligence. So we would use computer vision algorithms. They would be then used to analyze and process these images to make decisions on what the nanobot should do next. These directions, so after it processes everything, these directions would then be sent back through the wireless communication system and processed on nanochips that would be embedded into the nanobot, our little submarine, right? There's nanochips that are as small as 14 nanometers, right? There's other ones that are 20, 25. They go up they continue growing, right? We can pretty much get a chip with whatever number of transistors. There's transistors as small as 1 nanometer. So if you think about that, you can build these chips up. Transistors are necessary for computer chips, but we can have a few different chips. You can have a pretty large one. You can even go as far as like saying 400 nanometers, 500 nanometers, where you have that 600 nanometer, structure that we need for wireless communication. So we can actually get the chip smaller than that, much smaller than that. So these chips could be used in conjunction to control different things, right? They could be used to control that propulsion system, and this could be simple directions: up, down, left, right. If you had, it could be any number of processes could be used could be ran on these chips. These nanochips would give commands to the propulsion system and other components, right? And our final component, which we're going to talk about now, is CRISPR. CRISPR is a gene editing tool that can alter the DNA of human cells like a very precise and easy to use pair of scissors. So that is a direct quote from the National Cancer Institute. Later in the same source, they state slipping CRISPR into lab-grown cells is one thing, but getting it into cells in a person's body is another story. Researchers are exploring different ways to fine-tune the delivery of CRISPR to specific organs or cells in the human body. Right, so that's exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about navigating through the human body to the bloodstream touches every single cell in the body. This is exactly what we're talking about: is navigating through the body on command, right? Using there's two ways you could look at this. We could have this thing completely automated, where we're running it through, we're gathering all this data, what's in front of it, what's around it. Maybe it's going a little bit slow. We're controlling its propulsion, right? Like which way it's moving. And these could be controlled by algorithms on the outside. Once you have that data, it could be doing this completely autonomously, right? It sounds like autonomous vehicles is an autonomous bot running through our body that is just handling, that's going from cell to cell and using this CRISPR to edit DNA, right? Or it could also be like a human being that's watching, right? Controlling, like a drone, where you're basically like, okay, well, I'm piloting this thing. I think it would be somewhat, you would probably start off that way. You'd have a human watching, and fine-tuning these algorithms and fine-tuning the whole process until we could get it to where it could be autonomous. And I want to make clear that this kind of technology already exists, right? So there's already, but the way that they use it is, they kind of drag, they've made nanobots and they've inserted them into the body. And the way they get them around is they use ultrasound to kind of guide this thing. And they're like a magnet, where it's kind of like dragging it along. We want to move it this way and this way and this way. That's very, in my opinion, very inefficient. And it doesn't do these gene therapies and other components that we're talking about. But overall, if we were able to get this thing, to work, we'd be able to solve that problem. Where it's saying researchers are exploring different ways to fine-tune the delivery of CRISPR to specific organs or cells in the human body. This would do that, right? And if we could accomplish this task and navigate our nanobot to targeted cells in the body and edit DNA on command, we may have the power to affect aging on the cellular level. So what you see on the screen, right? Capillary minimum width, thinnest blood vessels our submarine would have to pass through, 3,000. Now all these conversions have been done into nanometers. So 3,000 is the thinnest part that this bot would have to travel through. Now, minimum size for red blood cells are 7,000 nanometers. So as you can see, they're actually larger than the smallest capillaries that they would have to go through. This is because red blood cells can stretch and change shape, and squeeze through these tight spaces. Now, there is technology out there that, where they're working on stretchable, tech. But as it stands, we're kind of going under the impression that we're going to be dealing with rigid structures. And so that means we want to stay under that 3,000 nanometer threshold. We want to kind of make that a safe range. We're saying, 2,500 to 2,750, maybe 2,800. We don't want to be like 2,999 nanometers. I mean, maybe it could be closer to that 3,000, but I'm thinking around 26, 2,700 just to be safe. Now, if you think about a few of the dimensions we've thrown out over the course of this talk, was the nanotubes ranging from half a nanometer to 100, a couple hundred. But on average, we can get them to 1-2 nanometers wide if we wanted just to have like a thin, like imagine like a hole surrounding this thing, right? So it had space on the inside. If you did a complete surrounding of the perimeter around that, you can do a couple nanometers thick and still have a lot of room internally inside of the bot. Now, the other component that we discussed was the wireless communication system. So that was 600 nanometers. And then we talked about, maybe a series of nano chips. And you'd also have, a propulsion system potentially that we didn't go into. All these things would increase the size, and the smaller we can get everything else. So we got the wireless communication system was 600. That was the largest thing we talked about. Nano chips, you can get down to 20, 25, 50 nanometers, maybe a few of those. So we're still well under 1,000 nanometers, wide that we're talking about. So we still have plenty of room, right? Just like Richard Feynman said, there's plenty of room at the bottom. Now, we'd also have to have room for CRISPR. We'd have to have room for, maybe supplies. And we'd have to think about how do we resupply this thing? There's how do we have an energy source? How do we resupply? And then we also have this. So I want to go over this. Is that there's the average cell size, right, is 100,000 nanometers. And 70% of that is actually cytoplasm. So that would be the area you would have to the bot would go into to navigate through a cell, right? So 70,000 nanometers to kind of go around and navigate and find DNA and then repair it. All these numbers are doable, right? Like, so inside of this structure we've built, if we could just shrink cameras down, and so the areas we'd have to focus on most to make this a reality, right? Or obviously optics. How are we going to see? How are we going to get that data to then use our algorithms on to navigate through? And a propulsion system, right? So optics, propulsion system, and energy source are three main things that people should focus on in this area to try to make this a reality. I think that if we were able to make breakthroughs in those areas, that this could definitely be a real thing. We could use this to, not only just for aging, but also to fight cancer and many other diseases. The potential for this is limitless, really. And if nanotechnology is already revolutionizing the medical field, this is just another way to do it. So I hope I've got, some creative juices flowing maybe. And honestly, I hope you've had as much fun as I had. Thank you.